Welcome back to Off Ball Takes. This is your host, Yarby Laws, and this is my co-host.
Christopher Wells.
We appreciate all the support on our recent content. And before we do get started, please don't forget to like and subscribe and follow us on Instagram and TikTok at the OBT Podcast for more content and updates.
Yes, we're back at it again with another offseason review. But first, we had some huge news occur in the NBA, and that has to deal with the Los Angeles Clippers. Now, if you haven't already heard, right, at this point, it is Friday. Pablo Torres, right, who's been doing some work for Meadowlark Media. He's been doing some investigative reporting, and over the course of 7 months, he was able to put together a pretty significant piece that alleges, right, that Kawhi Leonard, right, for the Clippers, right, and Steve Ballmer, right, they basically alleged a $28+ million payment, right, with the potential of circumventing the salary cap, right. There's a lot of other stuff involved there, right, with the organization called Aspiration, right, that Kawhi was, I guess, paid to no show, do whatever for. And then that supposedly that company also was kind of a scam. They did some things with some other celebrities as well in terms of endorsements, right, for environmental reasons and tree planting and things like that. But basically, the real question here is now the NBA is investigating, doing their own investigation. And so the question now is whether or not the NBA actually finds something, right? Do they actually find out that this is true? Because the real problem is, if this is true, there's going to be some real consequences for the Clippers, right? And everybody's been talking about what could happen, right? There's things such as the usual stuff involved, right? Where maybe they take away draft picks. Maybe they fine the team. There could also be an issue with Kawhi's contract where some people think maybe it could be voided, right? This relates back to 2021, not his initial contract that he signed with the Clippers in 2019, but an extension that he signed back in 2021. So a lot of not great stuff going on here. And then actually the day before we got on to record, right, Steve Ballmer was on ESPN and he did a sit-down interview with Ramona Shelburne, but most of it was him basically saying, I don't know what happened, right? I'm not sure what, I didn't know that this stuff was going on. Of course, this is all alleged, so we don't want to necessarily say anything specific, but it didn't really look good from him just because we know that by and large for the Clippers, he's been pretty active owner involved in a lot of stuff, right? And just the idea that he wouldn't know anything, don't really know, but either way, this is a big deal, and we've not really had a whole lot of NBA news going on right now, and this isn't going away anytime soon. If you want to know more, get into a lot of the specifics, right, on Pablo Torres' podcast, Pablo Torre Finds Out, right? You can check that out, and that's where you're going to go through all the information, right, that he's put together, like I said, over 7 months. I mean, he's got bank statements, he's got interviews with former employees, so it's well put together, it's well researched. Of course, the NBA is not just going to take his word for it, but this is a big deal.
Yeah, it's definitely one of the biggest bombshells I think that we've seen in recent history. And unfortunately, it comes with the Clippers, right? Because we already talked about their offseason. We were very high, on what they did this offseason. And this kind of, I think, is a little bit of a stain because obviously this doesn't really have anything to do with the offseason. But now I think it's being overshadowed by the fact that you have another Clippers scandal. So like you said, go out and look at those videos and the reports and stuff because, everybody's making videos and, making content on it. But, we don't want to get into any crazy specifics, but it's not looking good for all parties involved. That's the simple, thing that you can come away from this with.
Right. And there was also some additional reporting that had come out from the Boston Sports Journal about that 28 million may be even bigger, that it was actually closer to like 50 million, right? Like around his actual contract.
Allegedly.
Or so. Allegedly. So you have to put that out there as well, right? But just if all that is true, there's going to be some problems because we know with Adam Silver and the NBA, I'm sure the league is split, right? Just because there's, of course, a world where maybe you don't want to open up a Pandora's box and maybe you have some other stuff that they're going to have to figure out with some of the other people who own the teams. But then there's also the issue of, if it's true, you can't allow it to continue because you don't want a scenario where you have some of the owners who have a lot more money like he does, right? He's the wealthiest one in the league by a lot. He's worth over 100 billion. You don't want a scenario where you could allegedly sign a guy and then basically off the cuff, off the table, pay them X amount of money, then it's like, oh, well, then if I got that X amount of money, then I could just sign with this team for a small amount. You don't really want something like that to occur. So if they find out that this alleged stuff is true, right, then they're going to have to crack down on it. And I don't know what they're going to do because I know in the past there's been kind of a reputation from Silver that he's been a little bit soft in terms of addressing some of these issues. I know, in fairness, there were two people that were forced to sell teams in terms of their personal character, but some of the other stuff like say tampering or some of the other potential off the court issues that maybe some players or teams have had, it's just not really a great reputation there. So I think it would be important for the league, if this is true, to crack down on it so that way you don't have it happen again. I don't know what's going to happen because I don't know if it's true or not, right? It's all alleged. It's that information, the investigation is out there, but of course the NBA has to do its own work to make sure that they can corroborate it and make sure that it's all true.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, so we'll see, and we'll continue to update as it goes because this is a huge story. We still have some time before the NBA starts. Clearly, it's not going anywhere. I'm sure there's going to be other stuff talked about as well, right? Of course, I'm sure a lot of the other places will cover it too, right? I know ESPN, they did the sit-down interview, but they did not initially cover it, but now they're talking about it. So that's the biggest sports network in the world. So we'll see where this goes from here. But like you said, doesn't look great if what's alleged is true, just because you can't really do that. It's against the rules if that's the case.
It's quite literally illegal.
Yeah.
Alleged.
So, yeah, exactly. And, we'll see what happens after that. But now, moving on, we also have some more offseason stuff to talk about because we do have a couple of teams to cover with their offseason. It's the Brooklyn Nets and the Washington Wizards, right? A little bit different than the last couple of teams that we discussed because they did a lot of their work, I guess, similar to the Suns, right? But it's a little bit different because they did a lot of work through the draft as well, right? They also had some free agency business to take care of. But for the Brooklyn Nets, the big thing with them is they had 5 first-round picks, and they used all of them because we weren't sure going into the offseason or going into the draft whether or not they were actually going to use all of those picks and whether or not they were going to make trades. They did make some trades, but those trades were actually to bring in more picks, right? Because they didn't initially start off with 5. So the 5 guys that they drafted, Yegor Demine was their highest draft pick, right? They took him. They took Nolan Traore. They took Drake Powell. They took Ben Saraf. And then they also took Danny Wolf, right? Now, the main issue that I think we had when we were covering the draft in our draft live stream was that most of those guys, not that they're the exact same player, but that a lot of those guys kind of need the ball. A few of them have questionable jumpers, right? Where it's kind of a work in progress. And you just kind of wish that, that they would take maybe some of the more talented guys available. But when you look at the Nets draft picks, are they all going to be terrible? I mean, given how many shots you had, right? I think there's a decent chance that at least a couple of them could still be pretty good down the line. And the only one that really feels kind of, I don't know, where it's like you don't feel amazing about it is Demine, just because of where he was drafted. Most of the other guys in the draft for them were drafted later, right? Like after him, Traore was the next one at 19, right? And then Saraf and Danny Wolf were 26 and 27. So it wasn't like, all these other picks were also lottery picks or top 5 draft picks, but Demine was taken 8th overall. So that's the one that you almost feel like has to be the best one. But we've talked about him before where we're just not sure about him, right? Obviously, he's got size and length for a guard. He's got passing skills, playmaking skills, creativity, and everything else. And in fairness, in the summer league, right, defensively, he looked, fine, I guess, in terms of steals and passing lanes, and he's got length to also block shots. But the issue is, what's the jumper going to look like, right? What's the finishing going to look like at the NBA level? And that's kind of a hard thing to bank on if you're going to ask a guy to be an on-ball guard. Again, he's 6'8", 6'9", so that's pretty good size for a guard. I mean, that's great size for a guard, actually. He's not really big or strong or muscular, but he's still tall. It's just I don't like the idea of having a guy who's going to be a floor general, going to be a guy that's going to run your offense, and he's got a questionable jumper. Now, if you're going to tell me that that's going to work out and he's going to be a good 3-point shooter, okay, right? But if it's going to be a guy who's just shaky at best from the perimeter, I don't think that that's going to work out. And that's the one where, like I said, at the 8th pick, you just don't feel that amazing about it, right? Like, say, like a Nolan Traore, he's got some questions like that as well, although he's a much better athlete, right? So that's the part where you feel good about that. And he's 6'5". It's not like he's small, but he also was drafted much later, right? So and then defensively, I don't think people feel quite as amazing about him out of the box on defense in terms of knowing how to do it, but he's got more physical tools in terms of the athleticism. And then for the other guys, right, like say like a Danny Wolf, right? He's a guy that's got some good footwork and some good skill sets for a guy who's 7 feet tall, right? But he's got decent touch. He can play with the ball in his hands as a big, which I think is pretty intriguing. It's just a matter of, is that actually going to work at the NBA level? But he was also drafted 27th overall. So even if it doesn't work out, it's not that big of a deal in my opinion. But he could be a solid player. And then Ben Saraf, right? That's another guy that's an international player, right? He came over from Israel because I believe Traore came from France, right? Demine came from BYU, but he's another guy where he's a good passer. He's left-handed, right? And he's another big guard, right? Kind of like both Traore and Demine. But it's another guy where can he put it all together? I think, in fairness, he's got, I think, a better perimeter jumper than those guys, right? But I still need to see out to the 3-point line. He's more of at least right now, a mid-range guy to kind of start off. But if you're going to ask which guys you feel highest about, that's kind of, I mean, I feel like Traore, I do kind of like just for the combination of the athleticism and the passing and everything else. But I'm just not really sure about Demine. That's so Traore I'd probably be the most high on, but any of those guys could be potentially good. It's just I feel like most of them are going to be projects to start off. I don't feel like any of those guys are going to probably come in with a complete game right out of the box, right? Maybe Saraf because he can shoot, but how much is he going to play? I mean, we'll see. But after that, you look around at the rest of what they did. They traded for Terrence Mann. That was part of the draft stuff with the Hawks and the Celtics, right? Where the Hawks got Porzingis and the Celtics got Niang, and then the Nets got the pick and Terrence Mann, right? He kind of fell out of the Clippers rotation. So what does he look like in Brooklyn? I mean, I guess he's okay. I mean, 15 million a year for the next 3 years, not amazing, but he'll be a guy that'll just get minutes on this team just because they brought back Day'Ron Sharp, they brought back I believe Zaire Smith as well. Zaire Smith's contract I don't think is official, but Day'Ron Sharp's is, right? It's basically about 6 million a year. So that's fine, right? For a big man, then an athletic forward, right? Zaire Smith didn't work out as much on Memphis, but maybe he could be something in Brooklyn. And then Cam Thomas, the other day, right about a day before we got on, he was re-signed to a new deal, right? But it's only the 1-year qualifying offer. So I guess don't really want to call it a re-signing, but it's more so he accepted the qualifying offer, which is key because he can void any trade, right? And then after that contract is up, he's an unrestricted free agent. So he could leave and go anywhere he wants. I don't know if he'll be traded. You would feel like because they got the qualifying offer that they probably don't want to keep him long term because I don't think they want to pay him X million per year. Otherwise, they would have just done it.
Mm-hmm.
So my guess would be that he gets traded and that he goes somewhere else. Maybe he's a good 6-man for a team. He has improved. He's improved as a scorer. He's improved as a playmaker. Just not that great defensively. But I feel like he's a good player. He's a guy that I think could go onto a team and play and score and get buckets and's got some additional playmaking ability. It's just a matter of I don't think he's going to necessarily do that here because it's pretty clear they don't want him and they don't want to pay him. So the Nets were active. They also got Haywood Highsmith in from Miami as a wing. Does he actually play or is he just a buyout guy? That's the part that I don't know. I mean, if I look at their offseason as a whole, they had a bunch of draft picks, so you like that. They made some trades to kind of get off of some of those other deals, so I guess that's fine. So for this team, in terms of the curve, I guess it's like a B offseason, especially because now they got their picks back. But the only issue is, do I really like all their picks? I don't know. I mean, this team is going to be bad and they want to be bad. So they're on the track. It's just a question of, will these guys work out? But they could also be so bad that they'll still get the number 1 pick next year anyways. And then hopefully they get one of the main guys and then it'll work out. So maybe that sounds like I'm being too harsh or too high on the Nets, but it's more so just they need to suck. And they did about as much as they could possible to stink. And they're well on their way to being probably one of the worst teams in the league, especially now. The thing is they're in the East, so maybe they'll play some of the bad teams a little bit more, but they're going to be terrible. So I don't really have too much of an issue with what they did, even though I don't know if I love any of their picks, but I'm just kind of looking at it going forward.
Yeah, I have a big problem with what they did. I think they could have executed this a lot differently. First of all, I do want to say the grade for me is a D. I give them a D for this offseason. I don't like anything that they really did. The only draft pick that I really do like is probably Danny Wolf, just because of what he could potentially be down the line and stuff. But like you said, all these guys are pretty raw projects, right? Like, I didn't expect them to pick Demeen. That was the one that really threw me off, and I think from there it was just a downward spiral of just random picks that don't necessarily make sense. And the fact that they had 5 draft picks and used all of them was the main concerning factor to me. I think they could have done better. They could have potentially consolidated that and turned it into something else, down the line. But nonetheless, they drafted 5 guys. We'll have to see how they work out. But none of them I'm really like, okay, yeah, this is amazing. Like, this is a steal, except for potentially Danny Wolf, because I did like what I saw from him in college, and I think he's probably the most polished right now and also has the most potential, down the line with the intangibles and obviously outside shooting and stuff like that. But then the Michael Porter Jr. thing on top of that, I mean, like, it's okay. I think Denver won that trade in my opinion, but that was odd. And then the whole qualifying offer for Cam Thomas on top of that. Yeah, Michael Porter Jr., acquiring him, that was interesting. I mean, I don't necessarily like the fit. It's okay. But like I said, that kind of contributes to my grade. I don't really like it. I think Cam Johnson was better, but I guess in theory you do get Michael Porter Jr., who has tons of scoring potential. The problem is, the injuries have kind of always held him back in certain aspects of his game. So he never really got to be the player that I think a lot of people forecast him to be in the league. So there's that. And then Cam Thomas with the qualifying offer pretty much means he's gone. So you lose there. I think it's just been L on top of L. And like I said, it all started with the draft, right? And I just feel like ever since the draft, it's been a downward spiral of just not really knowing what to do. But like you said, maybe that's by design. But I think they could have done this in a less chaotic way, where now you have 5 first-round draft picks that are pretty much going to be fighting to see who's actually going to be, a guy moving forward. Granted, it's a bad team, but still, I'm just not really a fan of that psychology. There's no game plan here.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, I'd be remiss to mention the Michael Porter Jr. trade, which kicked it off. Of course, which kind of tied in, I guess, to me talking about them getting off the contracts, where it was Cam Johnson, and then Brooklyn's going to get back a 2032 first, if I'm not mistaken, and then also they get back Michael Porter Jr. So he's got, I guess, less years on his deal. I mean, he's got $40 million for the next year or so, and he's a different player from Cam Johnson. Talked about Cam Johnson may be better in the team concept, although Michael Porter Jr. has fit in to his role in Denver, right, where he's a catch and shoot guy, a guy who can get hot on different nights. But now he's taking it to Brooklyn, and he's made a lot of noise this summer, right, for a lot of different comments that he's made about a variety of different things. Yeah, this team is going to be bad. So, I mean, if we're looking at their over-under for this upcoming season, their over-under is 20.5. I mean, could they win more than 20 games in the Eastern Conference?
Maybe. I mean, what, they won 26 last year. They're probably going to be worse. I think they go over though. I think it'll be a light over, maybe like 22.
Yeah, I'll give them the over too, but it's going to be hard. I mean, just cuz you're going to have to turn to some guys, but if Cam Thomas is healthy while he's on the team, maybe he just randomly wins them a handful of games. Maybe
Sure.
Michael Porter Jr. gets hot and wins them a handful of games, but the wins are going to be hard to come by, right? I think this might be the worst team in the East. I think this will be the worst team in the Eastern Conference.
I agree.
So now let us know your thoughts on the Brooklyn Nets offseason, whether or not you like the moves they made. Now we're moving on to the Washington Wizards, right? Which I think is a little bit more exciting, I think, to talk about just from an overall perspective because they have a little bit more of a young core in place, right? So if you want, since you're the Wizards guy, you can take it away and I'll kind of give your thoughts on the Wizards offseason since this is your team. I think
Yeah.
people would like to hear from your perspective what you think about it.
Yeah, I'll give the short rundown of what they did in the offseason and what they looked like last year. Last year they came into the this offseason I think with the second worst record in the league. And I think the story with them starts because the season last year wasn't really super eventful, right? Like I don't think there's a lot to say there, but I think the story with them starts falling from potentially getting a top 3 pick to number 6, where they drafted Trey Johnson, which is a blessing, for all the Wizards fans out there. Our community has been singing his praises and embracing him, pretty much from the jump. And in summer league he looked phenomenal. They went out and grabbed Cam Whitmore for some second round picks, and we had a plethora of those. I think at the time we had the most second round picks in the league, so putting those to good use. And that's a good player to pick up. I think for this team, he's a young guy who's ball dominant, and I think can showcase if he can actually be a player in the league and stuff like that. And then we went out and traded Jordan Poole to New Orleans for CJ McCollum, which I think people were split on at first, but I think it makes more sense from the Wizards' perspective, right? Because that's going to be a expiring deal that you can, potentially, free up a ton of cap space, because I think that's what most people are excited about. Yeah, the young core is being built, but next year, next offseason, they're going to have, I think the most cap space in the league. We'll see what they do with that, but I think that'll be, the pathway of, kind of looking at what Detroit did, where you surround your guys with some veterans that actually make sense with what the core identity of the team is. And I think that's going to be this year, is figuring out the identity of the squad. And I think they've built a solid young core of guys, especially bringing in a guy like Trey Johnson, who's the bona fide scorer that we were missing, because last year offensively, yeah, Jordan Poole obviously would give you 20 a night, but it wasn't always the prettiest 20 a night, and I think it was inefficient at times, and it didn't necessarily fit with the other guys like Bub, Alex Sarr, Bilal Coulibaly. So you do have a solid group of young guys, and adding Trey Johnson is kind of like, I guess, the first catalyst to that. But they also in the draft added Will Riley and Jameer Watkins, who I think people are kind of split on as well. What else did they do? They also had Marcus Smart, and were able to get him to the Lakers, so there was that. Sadiq Bey as well, got rid of him. So I think, this is a nice change of scenery for once, where the Wizards are actually doing some very smart things. They're, like I said, freeing up the cap space, the young identity, and the young core is being built. And I'm pretty high on the offseason. I wouldn't necessarily give it an A, but I'll give it a B, just because I don't like the fact that there's an overwhelming population of young guys on the squad. I think they could have potentially kept a lot of the veterans, but I think having a guy like Chris Middleton and CJ McCollum, who are both, great scorers, and especially great scorers in their prime, to kind of mentor the young guys like Bub Carrington, Trey Johnson, and mold them into, similar archetypes. I think it's going to be a really fun season for Washington fans, and I think we should be positive, and I think a lot of people are over the fact that we dropped out of the top 3, and Trey Johnson is the best consolation prize you could possibly get, because that's about as blue chip talent at the 6th pick that you can possibly get. So I give him a B+.
Yeah, I think I would agree with that as well, right? I'll give him an A- just because I think, like you said, they did really good in the draft. They got off some long-term contracts, and just overall the vibe of this team just feels a lot better than you would have felt about it, say, I don't know, like maybe the first year we did this podcast, right?
Oh,
Or
yeah.
the year right after that, where you didn't know what was going to happen. They kind of had a middling team, right? They had some talent, but not probably good enough talent to really go anywhere. Now they're full in on the rebuild. Now they're kind of building a treasure trove of young guys. Are any of these guys going to be the number one best players on a really good team? We'll have to see, because I think most people like the majority of the players that you got here, right?
Mm-hmm.
I think most people like Coulibaly. I think most people like will like Trey Johnson a lot. I
Mhm.
think people like Bob Carrington, Keyshawn George. I mean, I think just as a whole, I think they like most of the guys here. Sarr, that's a guy that's a work in progress on the
Yeah.
offensive end.
Yeah.
I think he's got a lot of upside on the defensive end, but we also kind of look at this team where it's like they haven't really had a real table setter type of guy. That's like a guy who can use his ability to score to kind of help set guys up or just pass the ball really well. They have some guys who were quote unquote capable of making certain passes, but you don't really want them necessarily running your offense, especially as number one guys.
Yeah.
And that's where I think for Saad, that's where some of his offensive progression could come from. But he still has to be better than a 30-something% guy from the field. You know what I
Yeah.
mean? Like that's the part where that's tough. And that's the part that's a little disappointing because given his size, you would at least think, okay, maybe because of his athleticism, he could just be a guy that could kind of just finish over the top,
Mhm.
right? But that hasn't really worked out, right? Most of his time is spent on the perimeter, but even then, unless he's like a 40% three-point shooter, right? That's how you get the, inefficiencies on the offensive end. Probably will never really be like a post guy, but
No.
could he just be a guy who could be long, active, and stretch big, maybe catch some lobs, things like that, put backs, clean up duty, sure, right? But he'll probably never be like a focal point of the offense. He'll be another guy that could fit in there.
The,
And then
can we stick on Sar for a second? Because
yeah,
the Wizards fans are very split on him. Some people think like he's gonna be fine in terms of that regard, like right, like you talked about. Like we already know that he's a good rim protector. We already know offensively he might not be that guy. But some people straight up think that the Wizards are using him wrong. Some people think he should have more on-ball duties. Do you think that he should have more, or do you think he should just sit in the corner and be that guy? Because I think what's happening is he's suffering from the fact that I don't think he's a real five. I think he's more of a four, and we need to have a different type of center in the lineup that you can, throw in there and mix it up with. But we don't really have that at the moment. I mean, what, Marvin Bagley Jr., Tristan Vukcevic or whatever, like those guys aren't necessarily the kinds of bigs that you want to pair with Sarr if he's going to play the four. I fall into the category of he needs to be at the four and maybe a slight increase in on-ball duties, but not to the point where he should be running the point guard position.
yeah, it's kind of the question where I think that's a good point where, you kind of look at some, excuse me, other bigs, right? People have said Anthony Davis, right? He likes to play the four. Bam, right? He needs to play the four more because you can't just have him and no other defensive minded bigs out there. I think the thing is it would be nice to have the option to see both. You haven't really had an opportunity to see him play next to a true, physical rim protecting five. Like cause say like Valanciunas, he's got the offense covered. He's a good rebounder. He's physical, but he's not like your typical rim protector. And then
Not
like
at
you
all.
mentioned then you mentioned like the other bigs like Marvin Bagley. I mean, he's kind of undersized and probably not a guy that you want starting at the five next to a guy like Sar. And then Vukcevic, right? Kind of a similar type of guy, right? Where he's like a stretch big, right? Just kind of a guy that you don't really want being the primary center for your defense. So you just haven't seen that yet. So they're probably not going to have as many options to probably put him at the four.
Mm-hmm.
So he's probably going to have to learn how to play the five
Oh
more
boy.
on the fly. And like you said, that's probably going to have a hit to his offense because he's going to have way more defensive responsibilities. He's going to play against more physical matchups. So that's the part that's kind of tough. But it's also, I guess, a learning process for him. I guess because he's got the ability to put the ball on the floor and make the extra pass and make some plays, I guess maybe you'd like to see him, like you said, to have a few more on-ball opportunities. Is he ever going to be like a creator, a go-to guy? Yeah,
Saw flashes of it.
probably not.
He actually was
You
a
said
good.
what?
I'd say we saw flashes of it. He was actually an underrated passer. I think for his
Right.
size and position.
So that's where I think it makes sense to definitely give him some more on ball. And why not? I mean, like, this is a team that's clearly rebuilding, so he might as well get some opportunities to continue to expand the parts of his game, especially because you feel like that's a part of his game that's there,
Yeah.
right? It's not like he's never shown the ability to do it, so why not give him more opportunities? So I'm pretty much on board with that. I just don't, with this roster, they're not going to have a true center on the team, that you want next to him. So he's probably going to be forced into playing more five. And I guess, for you, what do you feel like the starting lineup should be? Because they do have a couple of vets, right, who've been
Yeah.
starters in this league for the vast majority of their career. But, are those guys going to be coming off the bench? or are they going to be starting ahead of these guys?
I think they're going to be starting ahead of them. Right? Like I think it'll probably be. This is the tough part because we don't have a real point guard, so I could see them starting CJ at the 1 and maybe putting Bub at the 2, or vice versa. Let's just say those two guys are interchangeable, right? So let's just go with Bub just for the sake of accuracy, I guess. Bub at the 1, CJ at the 2, probably. Oh yeah, this is where it gets tricky because then you have Bilal and then you have Chris Middleton. Yeah, dang. Probably have to go with Bilal. I think Bilal takes the start over Middleton probably. And then at the 4, that they might just play Middleton at the 4, honestly. And then have Sarr at the 5. Because I would like Keyshawn George to start. I would like Trey Johnson to start, but I have no clue what it's going to look like because I just don't think the older guys are going to come off the bench just because of what they're making.
Yeah, and that's the question. I guess for Middleton, it seemed like by the time his tenure in Milwaukee was coming to an end, because I remember us talking about it, he was coming off the bench because he just wasn't quite the same guy anymore. So maybe he'll continue to come off the bench. He is an expiring contract. I don't know. But yeah, you're kind of playing some guys that are kind of out of position there. But
Everybody's
the goal
out of
isn't
position.
necessarily but the goal isn't necessarily to win 50 games, right? The goal is to get your young guys as much experience and opportunities as possible while also having the vets on the team kind of show them how to be professionals, right? Which is a good thing, right? That's why you want some of these guys on the team. It's just a matter of, will they get in the way potentially of the development of some of these guys, right? Like say like an Anthony Gill, right? He's not going to get as many minutes, right, as some of the other forwards on the team. So he can kind
Praise
of
the
be
Lord.
You said what?
I said praise the Lord.
Right. So he's going to be one of those guys that's going to kind of be in the background, the locker room guy that's going to tell them a lot about, hey, here's how I've been in the league and this is the type of stuff I do. Whereas like, Middleton and McCollum will probably want to play. Now, those are guys that recently have not played every night because they've been hurt. So there probably are going to be a number of nights where they won't play.
Oh yeah,
They'll
no
be
doubt.
out, and then that'll be the opportunity for those other guys to come in and shine. What in terms of the guys who were already on the roster, right? Like the younger players, which one are you the highest on?
Yeah.
So like take Trey Johnson out of it because he's a rookie.
Sure.
And I guess maybe you're the highest on him anyways, but just for the other guys, which guy are you highest on?
Well, the thing is, I haven't seen Trey Johnson play a minute of NBA basketball, so I would be remiss if I said him. But Keyshawn George for me. I know a lot of people are going to say Bilal Coulibaly, he's amazing and stuff like that. I'm not as high on Bilal as I am on Keyshawn George, which is probably the hottest Wizards take that I've ever made in my life. But Keyshawn George is the do-it-all guy. I think he showed tremendous flashes from outside, being a great shooter. Obviously, the efficiency wasn't quite there during certain stretches, of his rookie season. But the end to his rookie season was phenomenal. He's been playing in the Eurobasket too. So is Bilal. So it's pretty cool to see a lot of the Wizards players playing in the Eurobasket. But I would go with Keyshawn George because he's a Swiss Army knife, right? He's going to be probably guarding, like one of the top guys on opposing teams, probably the second best player, while also having some strong offensive responsibilities, right? And I think we've seen him do some things with the ball in his hands, also be a switchable off-ball defender, and be also pretty switchable, I think, off the ball offensively as well, right? With the knockdown shooting, I think he has a higher shooting potential than Bilal, and I think that might carry him further in the league, if you want me to be honest, because I think the problem with Bilal was, up to the point he had gotten hurt, I think there were points where I liked his game, but then I started seeing the regression of like, okay, well, he still can't shoot, and I think that might be a potential problem for him, but I think I'm going to go with Keyshawn George for sure.
It's a fair point where, because he's got a well-rounded game and he's already a better shooter, then there would be a reason to maybe feel higher on him, right?
Yeah.
Coulibaly's still young, so he's still got plenty of time to develop, right? It's just a matter of consistency because I think at the beginning of last year we talked about it where he had some really big offensive performances for the Wizards early on. Then it kind of tapered off. Then eventually he got hurt, so we just didn't see him at all.
Yep.
At that point, and that's the part that kind of stinks because it just felt like there was a lot of lost time there. So I am curious to see how this all goes and how these guys continue to develop and then what they do with those vets, because as we get closer to the beginning of the season, you won't be able to have those guys get bought out and just join any team like they were able to do with Marcus Smart. So it's possible those guys could just be on the team, because I don't know if people are going to trade for them given their
No,
contracts,
they're not going
just
to.
because they're, kind of sizable deals, right? But I guess, then if we're looking at that, right, the question is now we're looking at the Wizards over under, and their over under a little bit different than the Brooklyn Nets, right? But still not crazy high. Actually, they're the same. They're 20.5. So that one, I think that's an over. I feel like that's an over.
Yeah. I'm gonna actually take the under.
Okay.
I'm gonna take the under.
You
I think
it'll be worse than Brooklyn?
Yeah, I do. I think there's gonna
Wow.
be awkward growing pains because you look at the collection of the guys and it's like cool, that's amazing. But I think you're gonna see some cold performances. It's not gonna be as consistent as people are making it out to be. So I'm gonna go under on this one. I know that's a crazy take, but
Yeah, I was kind of surprised on that one, but
they won
we'll
18
see.
games last year, so I don't
Right.
expect them to jump up crazy. I don't think like they could get the over, sure, but I don't think it would be by much. I think it would be
Right.
maybe
Yeah.
by
I'm
one or
not.
two
Yeah. I'm
games.
not.
But I think they're
Yeah.
going to hit the under. I think they probably win 19 games, if you want me to be honest.
Yeah. I'm not expecting them to get 30.
No.
But I think they could get like 24, 5. It's just a
Doable.
matter of, you do need some check boxes to be hit if they're going to get more wins than expected, because you're going to need Sar to be better. You're going to need Trey Johnson out of the gates to probably be pretty good and better as the season goes on. And then at least some of these other guys will have to take leaps as well, right? Because I mean, you're not expecting as much from McCollum and Middleton every night, because I don't think they'll play every night. So you're really banking on real growth from the young players. And I think it would be tough for them to get much more than 25 wins, but I do think it's doable. So what would a successful season to you as a Wizards fan be?
A successful season. Well, okay, that's the one thing that we didn't talk about was they have to be bad. Because of the draft pick, I think if it falls out of the top 8, I believe it goes to New York.
Yeah.
So, in my opinion, a successful season would be retaining that draft pick, no matter what. However you need to do that is cool. As long as we have that draft pick, I'm cool.
Yeah, and I'd say that's doable with 25 wins. Like that should still be a bottom 8 team if you're 25 wins or below.
Because I want them to try their best to get a top pick in next year's draft, because if they can land a guy like AJ DeBonsa or Darren Peterson, however those guys pan out in college, that would be phenomenal to get, your potential franchise guy. Because, I mean, like, I love Trey Johnson, and I think right now he's probably is the guy that people are the highest on, where it's like, okay, yeah, we could build a franchise around him potentially, but let's see him play first, and then we can, make that conclusion. But, because he's not, like, true blue chip like DeBonsa, Flag, or, any of those guys. So it would be cool to get one of them.
Right, yeah, and that, like you said, that would feel like it would kind of complete and round out
Yeah.
the group a little bit more.
Yeah.
If you can get that franchise player, then everything else becomes easier to balance everything out, because then you can figure out, all right, do we need this guy? Do we need that guy? Do we need to swap this guy out? Because that the franchise player is what makes everything from there on out workable. Because without that, yeah, that's where everything kind of falls apart, because it's just you need somebody who can kind of be the foundation of your team. And I don't think any of these guys can be that, but they could all be, many of them could be parts of a good team, but they have to improve and get better. And that's what you're hoping for as a young team.
Exactly.
Yeah. So let us know your thoughts in the comments about the Washington Wizards. How high are you on their young core? And whether or not you think they made good moves. Where do you put this young core compared to some of the other rebuilding cores in the league?
I put them, because I know this has been a debate, and we talked about it very briefly between last episode and this one. I'm gonna go Charlotte's number 1. I don't care what anybody says. I think LaMelo, he is the true cornerstone, right? We've seen him do amazing things. Obviously, the health is quite annoying in terms of not really being able to do anything further than the play-in because of certain guys' health. But I think you've got LaMelo Ball, you got Brandon Miller, and I think those two guys are much further along than any of the Wizards guys. So I think there's a lot of collective talent on the Wizards, and I think they do have the right building blocks. So I would put Charlotte at number 1. and this is just the Eastern Conference. And then because at the bottom, right, like yeah, I would go Charlotte number one and probably Washington number two, and whoever else you want to consider a young core could fall under those guys.
So I think that's a pretty spicy hot take. I think that's a good one. I think because they've already gotten, like you said, a few really good players. We
Mm-hmm.
just have barely seen these
Yep.
guys, play. I mean, the Oklahoma City, that's kind of like cheating. I guess they're super young, right? So that's like obviously an awesome young core. They've won the
Yeah.
championship the last year, so they'd have to be in there as well. Spurs, you got Wemby, right? So that's already a good part. Mixed with Harper and Castle, but those guys we haven't seen as much of them yet, other than Wemby. So it's about the collective. So
Yeah.
I think that's a pretty spicy take. But I feel like it's one that's a reasonable one.
Yeah.
I think that's one where like you could conceivably put them in there because if we're looking at a lot of these young cores, it's just tough because there's like some that are already playoff teams, right? But that's why I got a little bit more specific and I said rebuilding because there's not that
Yeah.
many teams that are in the rebuilding phase right now, right? And so, the Hornets, I guess they've been rebuilding, I guess, for a while,
Yeah.
but they already have some really good players on there. This, I guess the Spurs could be in that mix as
I
well
don't count. I
because they
don't
have
count the Spurs. I feel like I'm not saying their rebuild is complete, but you
right,
have Wemby already, and it's like the other guys are pretty much just the icing on the cake. I guess Portland. Yeah, I don't think. I mean, like their young core is pretty good, but I don't
yeah,
know.
but
They're carried by a lot of guys who are vets too, and you got
right,
what New Orleans. We haven't seen them play yet. Blind
yeah,
ranking, I guess, talent wise, it's a good collection of guys. Like, I'm not saying they're the Infinity Stones or anything like that, but
right.
they're cool. Utah, underrated, slept on. I think Utah would be tied with Washington.
Yeah, and Utah's and we haven't talked about them yet, but that's the other one that's going to be kind of fun to see, especially given the way Markkanen's played in the Eurobasket. Now he's not necessarily a young guy, right? But
Yeah,
he is on that team, and he's kind of his stock had fallen because of the last year or so where the team's been bad. His numbers haven't looked as good, but yeah, it's a good discussion. So like I said, let us know your thoughts on the Wizards. So now we'll get into a few more news and rumors. We did get a big thing about Cam Thomas. I kind of mentioned it in the Brooklyn Nets offseason discussion, but they did sign him or he did accept the qualifying offer, right? So this felt like it was kind of where it was trending, where they hadn't agreed to of a deal, right? It seemed like, according to what Shams was saying, the Nets basically lowballed him, gave him a very minuscule offer that really isn't that much different than what he really took, right? It's like the qualifying offer was like 6 million or whatever. So for Cam Thomas, it's big for him because he's betting on himself, right? If he continues to put up big numbers similar to what he's been doing, right, he'll outplay that, and then wherever he goes, wherever he gets traded to, because I think he will be traded, he'll get more than that when he's up for a new deal. I mean, last year he barely played. He only played 25 games, but he did average 24 points a game. He did average 4 assists, right, which is key there because again, not like a lot of great options to pass the ball to. Although that Nets team was a little different when he was playing and when the season began versus where it ended because they had Dennis Schroeder. They had, I guess, Dorian Finney-Smith and some other players as well. But, he was a part of a team that was winning some games. So, I don't think he's a scrub. I think he's a good player, and I think he can help a team. But it seems like this relationship with the Nets is going to end relatively quickly. He's also got the full no trade clause. So he's not going anywhere unless he's comfortable going there. Right. And I'm going to assume it would be him going to a team where he knows that they'll pay him.
oh yeah, big time, and that's what it comes down to. It's about payment, right? Like I don't know what the number is that he's looking for. Some people have reported 30, some people have reported 25. Regardless, the Nets weren't budging, and I think it does kind of suck to see him go, but I think it's going to be great because he's a great player. Great scorer for sure, and I'm sure there's a team that would buy in on that all in.
Yeah. And that's the thing is that we've seen him get better, each year. It's just, and I know that his archetype, right? People have talked about, well, it's an archetype that's, kind of not necessarily going away, but it's been devalued, right? Where you don't want to give a guy like that a ton of money, which is more than fair, but he should be getting more than the qualifying offer, right? Like 30 plus million a year is probably a lot, but I would say, if it's somewhere in the middle? Could it be like 20 million? Like, I think that would be pretty
Yeah,
reasonable,
yeah, yeah,
because I mean I think that would be pretty. If you feel like he's a guy that should come off the bench, I mean, there's plenty of guys who come off the bench that make 20 million. I'm sure he sees himself as even better than that, right? I'm just talking about like the floor should be he should be a good scorer off the bench, and I think that at the very least should be a 20+ million player. But I don't think he'll get 30 plus from wherever his next team is, unless he's a starter. And I don't know how many teams he's going to start for, but it's all about the payment, like he said, right? Like for him, he's got to get the money, and hopefully he gets it.
yeah, exactly.
Yeah, we also PJ Washington, right? Since the last time we talked, he got a 4-year, $90 million extension through 2030. So he got his extension because of the date he got it at. He can't be traded this year, so he's going to be on the Mavs throughout this season. We'll see what happens after this season, but this is a guy, right, who came to Dallas, right? This was a trade, where he came from Charlotte and he played super well. He started for them. They went to the finals. He's been good for them. He played well when Luka was out and they were finding ways to win. Now I'm curious to see what his role is on this team, because he was a starter initially, but now that you got Cooper Flag, now that you got Anthony Davis, he's probably going to be a guy that comes off the bench now, unless they run the, super giant lineups, which I guess they could. Maybe they run Cooper Flag as a 2-3. Who knows? Since they have so many guys with size and length. But this feels like a guy that at some point next, the season after or beyond, probably is going to have to get moved.
Yeah, I mean, it's still a great extension, I feel like, and he does fit their identity for sure. And for the time being, it just makes them more deep.
Exactly. Yes. And I mean, 4 years, and it's probably like, I think most people have said it's a little bit less, so like 87, 88 million or so. But I mean, for 4 years, you're talking about a little over 20 million a year. That's like you said, that's a great contract for a guy who's a very serviceable player who can do a lot on both ends of the floor, right? And
Hmm.
he gives you size and toughness. So it's a good contract. Like him a lot. He's done some really good work for the Mavs.
Yeah.
Then after that, uh, Jonathan Kuminga. What's next for him? What's next for Josh Giddey? What's next for Quentin Grimes? That's the part where we're not really sure, right? Because those guys are still restricted free agents. There's been a little bit more about Giddey, where the Bulls offered him a 4-year, $88 million deal. So, that's basically a PJ Washington range, where he's going to get like 20 million ish a year, right? And I'm sure, just like Cam Thomas, Giddey probably wants closer to 30. I don't think he's going to get it though. But I feel like of those three guys, he's probably the most likely to re-sign and get some type of non-qualifying offer contract. And then after that, honestly, I think Kuminga gets the qualifying offer, because I just don't think he wants to be in Golden State, and he wants more control over where his next destination is. So I think he takes the qualifying offer. Quentin Grimes, I don't really know for sure. I mean, just given the fact that we've heard literally nothing about him at all compared to those other guys, that one also might be a qualifying offer. Also, they have a bajillion guards, but that's the one that's a little bit tricky. But I think the other two feel like Giddey resigns at some point for some type of deal. Maybe it's short term, but I think I'm the most confident in him signing, some type of new deal. And then Kuminga, I'd say, like I said, qualifying offer.
Yeah.
And then Grimes, I don't know, but I would probably lean towards that too.
Yeah, I think that's just going to be the meta across the board here.
Yeah. And for Kuminga, for Golden State, that's kind of the worst case scenario, just because we've already talked about it. That means he can walk after the year's up and he'll be an unrestricted free agent. It also means he can veto any trade, and his contract is small, so you can't really get a whole lot back for him. So that's not the position that you really want to be in. But it's tough for Kuminga too, because he's going to have to show what he can do, and he's going to have to play pretty well and bank on that somebody's going to pay him. Somebody I think will probably give him some money regardless. It's like Cam Thomas. I don't think he'll get 30+ million a year, but I think somebody will be willing to pay him that won't be Golden State. And whatever team that is, that's where he's headed.
Yeah.
After that, Ben Simmons, his agent has cut ties with him, right? There's been some talks about maybe he retires. If he retires, I mean, that's kind of tough, just because, I mean, there was a time where he was one of the best young players in the league, especially on the defensive end. Back injuries obviously were a big part of that, of course. I mean, he had multiple surgeries, so I don't think he just sat out completely. But there was also the element of he did never become a great outside shooter. He probably wants more than a minimum contract as well. And maybe if he's going to play, would like to play a little bit more. So this feels like if his agent cut ties with him, I feel like he's probably going to just retire. I could be wrong, but that's where I feel like this is probably headed.
Yeah, that's wild. Yeah, it's just crazy and a crazy turn of events for that. But yeah, I think he'll find somewhere to land.
Yeah, and then last but not least, we got a new All-Star game format.
Oh, brother.
Right? So it sounds like we're going to have USA and World, which is cool, but I don't like that it's round robin tourney with 3 8-player teams. I would just prefer either East and West or USA and World, like and just have the old format like you normally would. I don't really feel the need to keep doing it, but if they keep changing it, that clearly means that nobody likes what's going on, right? I mean, I know we had one of those years where I think we had a counterpoint and we actually liked one of those All-Star games. I think it was 2 seasons ago. But by and large, the All-Star game and All-Star weekend has been mostly a joke for the most part. And it looks like we just got from Mark Stein that Thomas Sorber tore his ACL during a workout. So he's going to miss the entire season next year.
Damn.
So that stinks.
Yeah, that really does stink. Yeah, that's going to really suck for OKC because I think that was, a bright spot on top of winning the title. But the All-Star game, yeah, I when I saw that, first of all, I had forgotten what round robin meant, right? So I had to Google that for a second. I was like, oh, wow. Yeah, this is way worse than I thought. I don't like that at all. And for those people who don't know, that means every team is going to play each other once. And yeah, that's stupid. But I agree with you. It should go back to East-West. And on top of that, I think the best thing to do is, right, because here's the problem. People are blinded by nostalgia for sure. Like, not every All-Star game before they started changing the format was great by any means, right? It was always a hit or miss thing. However, it was just, there were always cool moments no matter what. And I guess there have been some cool moments recently, but not nearly as many as there were back in the day. And I think a cool thing that they could do is go back to East-West and just make everybody wear, the home and away uniforms for whatever team they play for currently. That's what I would say. Just right then and there, give the people what they want and call it a day. Because the problem isn't necessarily the format. It's the players don't really give a crap. And we've all known this for a long time.
Yeah, you got to have some more of an incentive in order to get them to, want to play with more effort. And there's also the element of it's the All-Star game. So how much effort are they really going to put in anyways?
It's about fun.
Put in more. If there was it's about fun. So, I think there should be more of an incentive, for them because there's always a risk, I suppose. I mean, I guess there's a risk in anything. I mean, we just read Thomas Sorber, tore his ACL in a workout. Yeah. So there's risk in pretty much anything. But if ideally you'd like the All-Star game to be as entertaining as possible. And like you said, even before the format changed, there were years where the All-Star game was pretty wacky and not in a good way, right? Like, I mean, like even before 2020, right? Like there were All-Star games that were kind of like, not really that great. And they were in the traditional format. So we'll see what happens. USA World, I think, would be cool as well if it's not East-West, but I don't feel like you need round robin, style or any of this other stuff.
Yeah, that's stupid.
Yeah, so and if that's the case, I think it also mentioned 3 days as well. So it's not even that. So I don't know if that means that the game itself is going to be multiple days, but because they mentioned golf, right? Because the Ryder Cup is the style that they're trying to emulate, and that takes place over multiple days. So I'm not saying that that's what's going to happen with the All-Star game. It shouldn't, but if that's the case, yeah, I don't know. I don't really like that personally at all.
Yeah, I agree with you. It's wild.
Yeah. So now to round it off, as we usually do, talk about our normal Instagram polls, right? That we usually pose, right, relating to our previous content over the course of the last week. And for our last one, we asked the question about the Phoenix Suns. Do you like the Suns' moves this offseason, right? And we got 100% yes. So it seems like most people like what the Suns did. And which I think we did as well. We gave them a C, right? Just because you also have the other stuff that you have to factor in where you had to waive Beal and buy him out and stretch out his contract or whatever and all that other stuff. But at the very least, there won't be any more expectations for the Suns. And at this point, that's probably a good thing for them.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, it is what it is. They're starting the retool with Devin Booker. We'll see if he, stays out his tenure there. But they paid him, and have some complimentary pieces, especially some brand new young ones. But they still do have a long ways to go. It's just this was a great start, I think. But you do have to always factor in the fact that you gave us a big three that ultimately failed, and I think that's bad.
And last but not least, we got a comment on that Instagram post from the Carson, Carrson, and the comment said, "Best 42-40 team of all time, Milk."
Okay, I don't know about the milk part, but I could see somebody making the claim that they could go 500 because I think realistically that's probably their ceiling.
Yeah, yeah. I think we both picked over for the Phoenix Suns, right? But we don't expect them to be a playoff team or even a
No,
play-in team. Right?
no.
Like, I mean, but could be wrong on that because over-unders have been kind of tricky the last few years with some of these teams. But either way, if you want to join on these polls, just go to @the OBT podcast on Instagram. Of course, if you always want to leave a comment on our Instagram or any of our other socials or our videos, @the OBT podcast as well, and continue to like and subscribe to our channel to help the content grow and help us, continue to see like what you want to get more out of us. So we appreciate all the support. Thanks for watching. See you next time.